welcome back to the Copper Club podcast. We've been away for a while. I've been on holiday. Cal's been on holiday for a long period of time. Peter Pankowski isn't joining us today. He's taking a well-earned rest after I roped him in to talk about Esteval and Vitor Roque. But Cal, you've managed to escape Peter talking about Esteval. Almost, I think that's a bit planned, if I'm being honest. But how you doing, mate? How was your trip?
Yeah, really good. I was just joking to you before the pod. I'd been to Istanbul, amazing place. Would recommend anyone goes. And while I was out there, I'd planned to go and watch Besiktas with my partner, who's not been to a European football game before. And while we were out there, the fixtures got changed, so it was actually Besiktas versus Fenerbahce at the Fenerbahce Stadium. So I decided that we probably wouldn't go to that one because of all the turmoil and the chaos that's been going on. Didn't seem like the best introduction to European football. And I would quite like to take her to another game. And I think if we'd have gone there, I don't think that would have been on the cards. But yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. Food was great, culturally great, history great. Yeah, can't recommend it enough. How was your trip?
Yeah, good. I'm carrying a bit of lurgy and jet lag, so apologies about my voice to anyone listening. But look, what a trip. Rio de Janeiro was amazing, to be honest with you. Like, it was bucket list stuff anyway. It's been long overdue. I wanted to go before COVID, but obviously things all happened there. But genuinely, like, the best place I've ever been to. Like, away from football, like, every corner you turned on, there was a Vasco shirt, Botafogo shirt, Flamengo shirt, Fluminense shirt. Like, football was everywhere. But, like, the city itself was just amazing. There's so much to do. Highly recommend it. And I went to Buenos Aires, which was absolutely freezing. It went from like 30 degrees to about 7. And unlike you, I took a chance and I took the wife to La Bombonera for a Boca game. But do you know what? She absolutely loved it. Maybe it's because Boca won 4-0. You can imagine how toxic that place can get firsthand. But I think I've tweeted about it as well. But just the experience there, like, even the videos I was recording weren't doing it justice. It's like half an hour before the start of the game, the whole stadium was rocking, and that just continued like constantly. And it was just, yeah, an unreal experience, to be honest with you. Like, if anyone gets an opportunity to go out there, it will cost an arm and a leg for a Boca ticket, but don't worry about that. Next month's paycheck can worry about that. Definitely go. Definitely go and experience it. But yeah, Rio for me was unbelievable. And like, sadly, the Brazilian league was cancelled whilst I was out there, but still got to go and watch Fluminense in the Copa de Brazil. John Kennedy scored. So what more can I ask for, to be honest with you? It was a little bit frustrating to go and watch John Kennedy score, because it's just, again, another sort of indication of how valuable he is. And like, his path into Europe is just being blocked by himself. And we'll have a little vent about him a little bit later as we start talking through the Copa Libertadores. But look, first, we will put that to one side. I love talking about the round of 16. I think it's the best part of the competition. But transfer news, you can't avoid it at the moment. And it's almost perfect time when you coming back, Cal, because out of nowhere, Palmeiras' Luis Guilherme has been linked to your beloved West Ham. We've almost had one each now. I had Mario come to Forest out of nowhere. Peter's had Esteval, so it's about time you joined us and completed the trio. But look, Palmeiras' Luis Guilherme, he's sort of the last one, isn't he? Kendry's gone to Real Madrid, obviously Esteval to Chelsea, now Luis Guilherme. It was almost a bit of an afterthought, but it was about time that someone was going to come in. But the fact that it's West Ham has really surprised me, to be honest with you. I know Liverpool were previously linked, PSG, Saudi Arabia were thrown into the mix. I don't think that was ever going to happen, to be honest with you. But that definitely ruffled a few feathers on Twitter. But Cal, you must be over the moon with this link.
Yeah. I was so shocked to see it, but I think it's really positive in terms of the direction that West Ham are heading in. Obviously, we've brought in a director of football who's been in charge of transfers and sort of broadening our scouting network over the past season or so. And yeah, much has been made of his trip out to Brazil. We were linked to Wesley Gasova as well, and Fabricio Bruno. Obviously, the deal there fell through. But I think of all three of the names that we've been linked to, I think Luis Guilherme is by far the one I'm most excited about. I think in terms of where his ceiling is, I think it's stratospherically high. And I think from a West Ham point of view, it makes perfect sense because obviously everything that's going on with Lucas Paquetá, and we don't really know how that's going to play out. Is he going to be able to play again? Is he going to be banned for life? Are we going to sell him? Are we going to keep him? It's all a bit up in the air. But I think it just makes perfect sense in terms of what Guilherme could develop into. I think as well, on the other side, you've got the prospect of Mohamed Kudus potentially leaving, not this season, but next season when his release clause comes into play. And I think in Guilherme, you've got sort of a blend of Paquetá and Kudus, and I think you could develop him in whichever way you saw fit. And I also think that will work wonders for his development as well in the first season, because I don't think anyone would expect him to come in and start. I think that would be a lot to put on an 18-year-old's shoulders, stepping over into the Premier League as well. It's not like he's going into a transitionary league like Portugal or the Eredivisie. So it would be a huge burden. But I think also in terms of the fact that he could cover Paquetá's role, or he could cover Kudus' role, or he could maybe play in the 8 or the 10, I think means that there will be a lot of minutes for him to grab and really sort of bed himself in. And then eventually, should one or both of those players leave, there's a ready-made position for him in that squad. Obviously comes at good timing as well with the arrival of Lopetegui, who obviously favours a much more possession-based style of football as compared to David Moyes. So I think that as well should be a perfect mix. So I mean, I'm super excited just on that level, but I'm sure we can break down Guilherme and sort of what some of his biggest strengths are for those that aren't of a West Ham persuasion, but would like to know a little bit more about what he's got to offer.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like most people would have watched the old YouTube compilations and seen him hanging out on that right wing and feeling as if he's very limited to what he can do out there. And I'm glad you touched on that number 10, number 8 role. I think he can be a lot more diverse. I think where we have seen, if I'm not going to go to his weaknesses straight away, but look, Abel Ferreira has sort of like put him on that touchline during his limited minutes with the first team. And look, Palmeiras haven't been the most exciting team to watch this season. Again, we'll probably get into that a little bit more. But with him sort of just being touch tight to the sidelines, he's been very limited with what he can and can't do. And I think when he plays through the middle more as a number 10, like, because he's so heavily left-footed, I think it's that unpredictability or that factor which would probably play to his strengths a little bit more. And that's me. You could turn around and argue that and say, look, straight away, I'm dismissing like the likes of Iron Robin, who built a career on just cutting in on the other side. So he definitely has that in his locker. But for me, like on his right wing, his right foot game, that's his weakness for me at the moment. Like I went back through old games over the last few days and I was watching him, and every time he can get into those positions, but on the right, he's really limited, and you can see how weak that right foot is. And in the Premier League, you probably need to show a little bit more, don't you? If you went to the Portuguese league, for example, anything like that, you probably get away with it for a bit. But you are going straight into the deep end. But this transfer wouldn't be a case of just throwing him straight in. It'd be a case of nurturing him over a season or two. And I always point out, look, Vinicius Jr. had a terrible couple of years at Real Madrid at first of all, and now everyone's talking about him being one of the best players in the world, if not the best player in the world across 2024. So look, these things take time. It will, I always say this with anyone who comes over, I feel like I need to protect them, especially when they're so young. But there's so much to like about him. And do you know what the best thing about Guilherme is straight away is when these South American players come across, it's always, yeah, but is he going to be able to cope with the Premier League because of the physicality? Guilherme for 17 is strong. He is like a bulldozer when he runs through defenders. And I'm not drawing any comparisons to this straight away, so please nobody clip this part up. But you know that iconic 30-second clip when Arsenal beat Real Madrid at the Bernabeu and Thierry Henry sort of like knocks the ball like 10-15 yards and just holds on to it. If you watch Guilherme, he's got such a long stride. That's what he does a lot of the time, is he waits for the defenders to sort of slip up or make their move, finds that 10-15 yards, and very different to Esteval in terms of Esteval's, the ball's glued to his foot. He's bringing that with him. Guilherme is very much like, I've seen 20 yards of space here. I'm going to knock the ball into that area, and I know that I'm going to beat you with my pace, and then I've got the strength to hold it and potentially wait for teammates to come as well. So it's part of a game which I really like. He's still there to be moulded completely. But I think that's exciting, whereas someone like Mateus Franca, who's obviously moved across from Flamengo to Crystal Palace, he's gone across and nobody knows what to do with him at all. There's no real indication, and I think that's why he's potentially struggled. But I don't think Guilherme has that. I think the options and his moldability could be a huge advantage. And as you said there, like there's players who will potentially moving on from West Ham in the next 12, 18 months. By the time he's come in, that position could be there for him.
Yeah, 100%. And I think in Kudus, he is probably the perfect player to learn under. I think what you've just touched on there, and in respects to how, May sort of, like you say, I did a little bit of looking earlier. It said he was 5'9". I feel like he's actually taller than that. I don't know how accurate that is, but when you watch him, he certainly seems at least more physical. He's got quite a good upper body strength for a winger, and I think in the same way that Kudus sort of is able to roll his man and then just like shoulder off even the strongest of Premier League defenders and just more than anyone in the Premier League this season, I think, has just been able to wriggle and ride contact and just carry up the pitch without any concern for who it is that's bothering him. I think Guilherme has that. Obviously, it would be a lot to expect him to just come in and do that straight away because there is a transition period. But training every day with someone like Kudus, who's made that his bread and butter within his first season and had the impact that he's had, I can't think of anyone else better to learn under. And I think as well, we mentioned earlier about how he's been played out on the right, but I think when I've seen him on the left, he's actually been maybe more impactful in terms of being able to get to the byline with a bit more ease. And I think we've seen that at West Ham this season as well with Kudus, is that he came in obviously having played the best football of his career out on that right-hand side, but he's got Jared Bowen out there, and he's made the left wing his home in the absence of Paquetá. And now you're playing with Bowen up front or Kudus on the left, or we're going to bring in another winger or another striker or whatever. So I think having someone, as I say, like Kudus, who has the same skill set, but also has had that versatility to adapt into those roles and make the most of it, I think just it should do absolute wonders. And I think as well, I think there's still a future in which Guilherme could turn into like sort of a combinative 8, I guess, in terms of how he sort of operates in the interior. I think his ball control, as we've said, is not quite Estevao levels. It's not like he's going to do tricks and flip-flaps and stuff, but he is incredibly in control in tight spaces. And I think receiving with his back to goal and taking a couple of touches and being able to release either to a left back, to a winger, to a centre mid, to a 10, I think just in terms of creating those combinations and helping the team progress up the pitch, there's a real future for him in that respect. Obviously, it depends where he's deployed. You're much more likely to be able to do this if you're playing in central areas than you are if you're actually isolated out on that wing, as he has been quite often under Abel Ferreira. But yeah, just super exciting. And I think the only other criticism that I would have, and I think Ben Mattinson, who is a friend of the pod, has spoke about this in his review of Guilherme, and I'd suggest anyone goes and checks that out. But I think it's something that he can really improve under Kudus, is for someone who's such a good ball striker, I don't think he has a high enough volume of shots. I think he operates in the half spaces, and he's so dangerous in the half spaces, like I say, with those combinations, able to bring players into the play, able to make darting runs into the box. But we've seen him score. I mean, I think it was against Independiente del Valle where he scored the winner in the last minute from outside the box, and he just wraps his foot around it into the bottom corner. And you don't see that enough, but he's clearly got the talent to do it. And I think Mohamed Kudus is, I mean, he's a lot of things, but if I was going to describe him in one, it would be absolute volume merchant. He's just getting shots off left, right and centre, and he's good at it. So it doesn't matter. It's not like he's wasteful. But I think having learning under someone who's going to like put an arm around him and be like, mate, it's fine. You've got the talent, do it. Look what I do, copy me, I think will be great. And it should help bring out those sort of final little pieces that we need to see from Guilherme to really develop into his full potential. And yeah, having a sort of prototype of Kudus, who I think he has all the strengths to follow in his path, will be great. And just being able to watch how you have a debut season in the Premier League and really grab it by the scruff of the neck is really exciting.
Yeah, I agree with that, because do you know what? It makes really good YouTube compilations, but if you actually watch the games in full with Guilherme, he gets to the edge of the box, and it's that decision there where he's beaten 3 or 4 people, it's getting a bit crowded, and he's like, do I shoot? Do I not? But I haven't scored in a while. And then he does a little bit of skill or moves the ball from one foot to the other and like gets into a dangerous area, but that's where he falls a little bit short. So it makes a really good clip to be like, wow, he's wandered into the box there. But the shot was probably 5-10 yards ago. And like you said there with the goal, definitely go and check out his strike against Independiente del Valle. Look, match-winning strike in the 94th, 95th minute away from home in Ecuador. Like, it's a really hard place to go and win football matches, let alone in the style he chose to do it. But we don't see him wrap his foot around the ball. He's very much like, he gets into those areas and like old school striking, as if like he was on like in the playground, to be like, well, is this how I hit a football? And like, he doesn't really test the goalkeeper too much. He doesn't fit his style of play. Like, he gets to that point and then it just becomes like a very much like a FIFA rated 60 player. That's the only way to describe it. That part of his game really needs nurtured. But look, we are picking out little things here and there. Overall, 25 million or 30 million euros for Luis Guilherme. It's just another very good deal and a very smart move by West Ham. So look, fair play if that gets over the line. If not, other teams will be sniffing. Hopefully not Saudi Arabia. We don't want to see that happen. But it makes sense, doesn't it, if players are moved on at West Ham in and around that position. And it's refreshing to see yet another Premier club Premier League club rather, away from the likes of Forest, Wolves, Brighton, breaking into that market and trying to sensibly put a sizable amount behind the 17-year-old. There's a risk there, but he comes across and has one good season in Europe. West Ham can't afford him anymore. Okay, yeah. And then they see 70, 80, 90 million, and then only the likes of the usual Man City, Man United can go, right, okay, we want to get him. And to break that mold, more teams need to venture out there. So look, really positive, really exciting move, one to watch. But let's park that transfer talk now and let's get into the Copa Libertadores. Let's have a look at the group stage, and then we'll predict the potential winners and have a look at the round of 16, because there's some really interesting ties, especially with Palmeiras playing Botafogo, which we'll get into. I think that's easily the tie of the round. But look, let's go through the group stage first of all. There's lots to talk about. I said before we jumped on the podcast, Cal, that a lot of my notes are rather negative here. I think this has been the first Libertadores in a while where there's been plenty of disappointment. I think we're in for a fair few shocks this season. I think the last few have been a little bit more predictable, to be honest with you. I think we did quite a good job, to be honest, in terms of our predictions beforehand, one or two falling short. But we all said, look, let's start with the Champions Group A. We looked at Fluminense and we said that we don't feel confident in them, that they will deliver another title. Now, people say tables don't lie. Well, this table does lie in Group A. They got 14 points from 6 and comfortably beat Colo-Colo and Cerro Porteño, who both finished in second, third with 6 points. So 8 points gap. But there's a lot to dive into here, and I've made a fair few notes so I don't miss any. So look, narrow victories, and yes, you need to win your home games really to guarantee qualification. And they won all their home games, so it might sound like I'm being really picky here. But Cerro Porteño lost 2-1, and the away team had a goal disallowed. The same happened again with Colo-Colo. Really controversial handball for that to be 2-2. Definitely should have stood. And then they fell behind twice against Alianza Lima and relied on Marcelo and John Kennedy to bail them out, a team which won their first game in 26 attempts last season, both home and away. So look, a really poor group, which, yes, we expected them to qualify, but this was a chance for them to make a statement, to be honest with you. And they didn't throughout the whole competition. They're really poor on the road. I think you can sort of like put a line through a couple of those, because often it's all about winning your home games, but winning them in style. Fluminense didn't do that. They've definitely missed Andre, who's been out injured, and he looks like he's going to go in the summer, so they won't even have him from the latter stages of the tournament. Nino, the captain, moved across to Zenit. It's a good job Peter's not on the podcast, because he obviously hates anyone moving across to Russia. But he's left a huge sort of void at the back, not just from defensively, but playing it out as well. And I've just been completely disappointed with them. Last thing I will bring up, if I'm going to sort of brush my ego a little bit, as I said, Herman Cano would be extremely disappointing this year. I think like last season, yes, he scored 13 goals, won the Golden Boot in 12 matches, were explosive. They beat River Plate 5-1. They sent statements out, didn't they, in the group stage, where he scored 1 this time in the Libertadores, 1 or 2 in the league as they're struggling. I'm screaming at the TV for John Kennedy to sort himself out and get in there, because his finishing ability is world class. His finish against Alianza Lima, go and check that out as well. Match win in the last few minutes, the way he's let the ball slide across his left shoulder, a little feint, hasn't even touched it, and hasn't even thought about where he's going to put the ball in the back of net. Just a split second, incisive, instinctive finish. It's just so frustrating, because I just want him in Europe. I want him to sort himself out, but he's a party boy, and that's never going to change. But look, Cal, I've vented enough about Fluminense. Like, it's just really disappointing, isn't it, from where they've come from last season. Hopefully they were going to build on that, but they haven't. And look, Denise's job's on the line. Like, even when I went out there in the Copa do Brazil, he put his full team out there because he knows that he needs to keep the crowd on side. And they won that tie 4-0, and the fans behind me, luckily I had Natalia Tavares with me from the podcast and she was translating, but I could sense that they were angry, but they were shouting for Denise to die, Denise to get out the club. And they just won the tie 4-0. So the club's not in a good position at the moment with relationship with the manager, and then on the field it's just not there, is it?
No, it's been really disappointing. Obviously people will know that I have a soft spot for Diniz as well, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to advocate for it at the minute. I think you've covered it well, to be honest. I don't think I need to go into too much more detail, but I think just in terms of the luck, like riding their luck throughout the group stage, I think, as you say, the table really flatters them. I think even that away win in Colo-Colo, they got battered. I think for Fluminense to come away from a game and only have 37 possession is unheard of.
Yeah.
They're in every other game, I think they had 70% plus. And yeah, Colo-Colo had 24 shots and Flum only had 4. So I don't know how they managed to scrape away with that, but it would have been a really different story had that not gone in their favour. But it does bring me on to the other issue that I have with them, which you've kind of touched on as well, is that in those games where they do have 70% or more possession, they're unable to turn it into convincing wins. I think they had 4 games in the group stage where they had more than 70% possession, and they didn't manage to win a single one of them by more than 1 goal. So if you're going to have that much of the ball, you need to be blowing teams away, really, particularly given the gaps in comparative gaps in quality against some of the teams in that league. As you said, Alianza Lima, compared to the squad that Fluminense have, they should be absolutely blowing them away. But the fact that they're unable to gives me real cause for concern moving into the knockouts, where you're less likely to get away with that sort of thing. And I think we'll touch on it later on. But in terms of the weaknesses that I've highlighted there and who they're going to be playing in the round of 16, I'm a little bit concerned that they could culminate to cause a bit of an upset.
Let's move across to Group B, where we probably won't have to say too much about this, really. Sao Paulo and Talleres were the teams who just blew the group away, really. Barcelona and Cobresal, obviously, 3rd and 4th, as expected. But look, we spoke rather negatively of Sao Paulo at the start of our predictions, but that was because they brought in Thiago Carpini from Juventude. I don't really understand the appointment there. He'd never managed, Serie A level before, and he came into it with negative tactics, which got Juventus promoted, admittedly, but Serie B standards pretty poor these days, and then implemented a really negative defensive 4-5-1, which saw him got sacked in true Brazilian style within about 4 or 5 matches. But they brought in Luis Zapaldia, who was at LDU Quito, who won the Ecuadorian top flight, won the Sudamericana last season, and he's come in, and at the time of recording, his first 10 games, won 8, drawn 2, adopted a 4-2-3-1 formation. Lucas Moura is very much at the heart of that. I think he scored his last 3 or 4 games. He's had a burst of life or energy in his advancing years, but he's still a key figure there. And they've all of a sudden gone from a poor Brazilian side out of the Brazilian other teams, in this competition, to ones who could sort of quietly go about their business in this competition. And this is the beauty of the Libertadores. It's 8-9 months long. So much happens in football during that period. But all of a sudden, a club with stability going into the latter stages of the tournament, I'd rather side with them than the likes of Fluminense. Cal, are you impressed with his first initial... Well, I was going to say you're impressed with his first game. Of course you are. But he's won 8 out of his 10 games. But look, Sao Paulo, are they a team who could potentially go far in this competition?
Yeah, I think so. I was looking at the bookies' favourites from the round of 16 onwards, and I think they were 12-1 when I looked, which I feel like is worth a punt given the form. I think if you look at their underlying numbers, I'm fairly sure, I haven't got them written in front of me, but I'm fairly sure they had the best defence in the group stages in terms of expected goal difference and expected goals against.
You're right.
And I think they've just quietly gone about their business, really. I wouldn't say that they've blown me away or that it's been massively captivating, but I think we've seen time and time again in the Copa Lib that's kind of what works. Boca Juniors were able to get to a Copa Libertadores final doing that, and they were doing it a lot more ugly than this. So I think there's reason to have confidence in Sao Paulo. I genuinely could see them reaching the final if they maintain this form. I think they've been incredibly difficult to break down. As you say, that double pivot, particularly with Pablo Mayo, is just insane. I think he's got such high potential, and I think his composure and the way that Zubeldia wants him to play is just a match made in heaven, really, in terms of receiving the ball off the defence and just keeping things ticking over, but also offering a really difficult screen in front of the defence for the opposition to break through should they get the ball back. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see them do pretty well in this tournament. I don't want to put my neck on the line and say I think they're going to win it, but I have just said I think they'll get to the final. So yeah, I think they've been quietly impressive.
I think it works. It's all about... I think at times it is all about the coach, to be honest with you. And I really like the guy who's come in, and we touched on Pablo Mayo there. He's been injured, but he's been injured at a point where he's going to miss Copa America, so he's going to miss the hype or the transfers around that. So he may miss, like, it might be a bit like Andre-esque, okay, a number 6 in that role who was so important to Fluminense last season. If he comes back, gets fit in the next 2 or 3 months after Copa America, he's not leaving Sao Paulo, so he could be like a huge figure for them, which is going to be massively important. The other team in that group, Talleres, it's they perform quite well. For me, it's the opposite to what I'm saying about Sao Paulo in terms of Ramon Sousa is wanted by a lot of clubs in Europe, and he's been massively and key for them in the final third. One of the best players in Argentina. He's 24, 25 now, so it's sort of last chance saloon for him to move across to Europe. And again, and this is, we've spoken about the beauty of this competition. It's also the ugly side, right? A team performing above expectations or looking strong, if they lose a key player like that going into the round of 16, unheard of, obviously, in England for like the Champions League. Imagine Jude Bellingham just moving across to PSG.
Yeah.
Wouldn't happen. So that's where it could be their downfall. But they have been one of the strongest Argentine sides in the competition. So I'm not just saying they're a one-man team, but it's they probably have limitations in this tournament, don't they, Cal?
Yeah. I think Ramon Sousa is an interesting one as well, because there's obvious strengths to his game, I think, in terms of his directness, sort of straight line speed, and how good he is at getting shots off in the final third and how quick he is with his feet. But I think you have to be really selective with what team he moves to in Europe, because I think my biggest bugbear with Ramon Sousa is how unreliable he is in the final third in terms of his decision making. I think that is what's separating him for me from being a genuinely elite talent, is that I think he's constantly trying to make something happen all the time. And I think that's part of his role within this Talleres side. I think that's understandable. But I think if he was to transition over to a big club who are going to dominate possession, and they're going to try and, in the same way, I guess, that Guardiola's tried to sort of coach that sort of thing out of Grealish and make him recycle possession a bit more and make the right decision more often, I think Ramon Sousa could become very quickly very frustrating for the fans of said team if he's constantly trying to play the right ball into the box or take shots on that maybe he'd be better off just rolling it back to the 6 to recycle possession. I think that will potentially hamstring him in terms of going to that move. That's not to say that he couldn't thrive in Europe. I think you just have to choose what club it is. I think maybe a slightly more transitional side or a mid-table side who aren't going to look to be completely dominant, but on occasion will still allow you that sort of platform to sparkle. I would be interested to see him come over. I think maybe a move to somewhere like Spain or Italy would be quite fun in terms of the pace of the league and just allowing him to show off what he's actually really good at. Before we move on, though, I wanted to highlight Kevin Mantilla as well, the 21-year-old centre-back. I think he's been really impressive. I think he is probably the future of the Colombian defence. And I think he, from what I've seen, has all the credentials to move over to Europe and be one of those nasty South American, strong, physical defenders, but also at the same time being a really impressive line breaker from the back. I think I've watched him 4 or 5 times now, and every time I've been really impressed by how sort of press resistant he is. Just like he looks like quite a physical, sort of cumbersome, brutish fella, but then when he's on the ball, he's so composed, and his vision to sort of play those fizzed low balls into the feet of the central midfielders and help his team transition into the middle third is something that a lot of the top teams in Europe are desperately looking for and really struggle to find. Usually you have to go for either the dominant defender or the ball-playing defender, and it's really hard to find both. But at just 21, he seems to be physically dominant. He's very strong. He's good in the air. I'd say 4 of the 5 times I've watched him, he's been really good in terms of holding the line. He does have an aggressive nature to want to spring out to the attacker and press them from behind. As I say, most of the time, his decision-making in this respect has been good. One game, there was a bit where he was a little bit ill-disciplined. But again, he's a 21-year-old with a leadership role at a good Argentinian side. Like, you can cut him a bit of slack. So I think a smart European team, I would say, if they were looking for a young centre-back prospect who could probably come in and handle the physical nature of European football and develop with an upward curve and a high ceiling, I think Kevin Mantilla is a good, almost certainly underpriced and undervalued prospect.
Yeah, I think there was quite a lot of links, as there always are, but there's a lot of links with him in January. So it'd be interesting to see exactly, again, like if the team gets stripped before the round of 16 or they've moved early in the summer, like it's such a critical part. But no, good to highlight. I've just gone through too many negative notes, so I'm glad that you've brought some positivity.
Trying to bring some positivity.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I want to skip past Group C because at the moment it's a little bit difficult because with what's happened in the south of Brazil, for those who aren't aware, there's been really severe floods, which has disrupted not only football but life for hundreds of thousands of people, which is like really sad to see. But Group C hasn't been complete yet. Football has returned for Internacional and Gremio. Gremio are in Group C. They're finishing their games elsewhere, obviously. So there's not much we can touch upon there, but I am going to bring some positivity because there are two players who we should keep an eye on: Gustavo Nunes and Nathan Fernandez, two young attacking wingers for Gremio. Gustavo Nunes is probably one which is going to be sort of, they're already slapping huge price tags on him because I think the fans there know exactly how exciting he can be. He scored an incredible goal against the strongest when they returned. So that was great to see them. I'm not slating the strongest here because the strongest were actually top of the group at the time, but a 4-0 victory for Gremio, probably deserved considering what they've had to go through. And it was good to see that the team were back and fit and ready to be prepared for this, because obviously they've not been able to train for a few weeks. So we'll leave Group C for now. I think the only disappointment, again, I'm going to be more negative here, is the fact that Estudiantes are bottom of this group. I don't really know how that's happened. They've been a complete disaster and they actually can't progress to the round of 16. They can potentially squeeze into a Sudamericana spot, but they've been a huge disappointment in that group. But it hasn't complete, so we can't talk about it in too much detail. Let's move across to Group D, which is been really interesting. This one's definitely been a tale of sort of two halves really in the first three fixtures compared to the next, especially for Botafogo. And I will speak positively about Botafogo, not just because I'm wearing their shirt. I think the shirt's so good. I'm being a neutral here, but there's so much to like about Botafogo. But they didn't finish top on goal difference. Colombia's Junior actually took that. And similar to Fluminense, I am going to sort of rip into them a little bit because I think the table lies here a little bit for Junior. I think they played Botafogo at a good time. It's when Artur Jorge had just left Braga and he literally stepped into the country 24, 36 hours prior to this match or whatever it was. And his job was really to oversee this match, but Botafogo were going through such an identity crisis at the time. Like they lost 3-1 at home to Junior, and it was a huge shock. But the goals they conceded were just embarrassing, to be honest. It's something you'd expect to see on Sunday League. And then they went and lost their second game to Liga de Quito. I told you, all my notes are negative. I'm going to flip it around. They lost the second game, and all of a sudden it was like, hang on a minute. I'd hyped up Botafogo to be potentially winning this, and they've lost the first two games, and they're staring down the barrel of an exit, not even for the Sudamericana. But look, Artur Jorge, has come in, he's steadied the ship. He's not overcomplicated it, really. If we look at the league form as well, like went to the Maracanã and beat Flamengo to 0, beat Corinthians at the weekend to 0. The defensive issues, well, they're concerned. The amount of attacking talent they've got at the moment is probably the best across the competition, which is why I'm so pleased to see that they've managed to sort of salvage their defensive issues. And Tequino Suarez is out injured at the moment, has been for a while, but similar to Herman Cano, his legs are sort of going, to be honest with you, but it's allowed them to be more fluid in the final third. Obviously, Luis Enrique, that huge purchase from Real Betis, he settled in really well. Junior Santos, top of the Libertadores goal scoring chart. Yes, came through qualifiers, but he was fantastic as well. I think he's got 8 or 9. Savarino's come across from Real Salt Lake City. He's come across, he's adapted really well. Should be a good player to keep an eye on at Copa America. I'm probably missing a few players here because there's almost too many to name. But they're also looking at bringing in Alan from previously Everton, which may sound a little bit ridiculous, but age 33, 34, he could really add that defensive structure and organisation which you need in this sort of competition. So age obviously isn't a worry there. There's just so much to like about Botafogo, but it depends who turns up, to be honest with you, with Botafogo. But I'll just touch on Junior before I ask for your opinion on Botafogo, Cal, because I'm quite intrigued to see what you think about them here. But with Junior, I went back yesterday and in full, I watched their 1-0 victory against Liga de Quito because I didn't see it at the time, so I went back, I wanted to watch it. And my word, they get lucky. Quito hit the bar like 2 or 3 times. Even the goal they scored on the counter attack, it was a beautiful ball played in, but they blocked it on the line 2 or 3 times before they finally found a way through. And it was just a case of when I went through more of their games, I was like, how on earth have Junior finished top here? And I genuinely think it was because Botafogo had that really terrible start to the campaign. But the new manager's come in, steadied the ship. Attacking wise, I think they're up there probably with Flamengo, if not a little bit better. And you brought up the odds earlier on in the podcast, and Flamengo 3-1 favourites, Palmeiras 7-2 second favourites. Botafogo is still priced at 20-1. It's a bit like Fluminense last year. Nobody fancies them, and I don't know if I'm completely in the wrong here, if I'm seeing something different. But Cal, what do you think about Botafogo and their chances here? Do you sort of echo my thoughts, or am I going a little bit insane here just because like I sort of fell in love with the kit?
I'm kind of caught in two minds about Botafogo. I think, and I think the way you framed it probably helps me understand why I am, is that I think I'd probably not given enough credence to that separation between Arthur Jorge arriving and the form that they were exhibiting prior to that. Because I think my notes, if I was going to mark them against their whole group stage, is that I think, yes, they've qualified, but I still think when you look at the quality of the teams in the group and how much they'd invested in their squad in the winter break, I expected them to walk this group, quite frankly. And I think to come out of this group with a goal difference of just +1, having scored only 7 goals and conceded 6, given the quality of the squad, I think is still a disappointment. But I think, as you say, the turning of the ship and the form that they've shown under Arthur Jorge, who is actually a great manager and did amazing things at Braga, is promising. And I think that's probably why they're massively underpriced at the minute, is that they're probably being punished for the poor form, and maybe there's not been enough thought that's gone into that pricing, quite frankly, because like me, they've perhaps not done that separation. I still think it's fair to have expected more from them, given, as I say, the quality of the players in the squad compared to the quality of the teams in the league.
It's a marathon, Cal. It's a marathon. Right?
Exactly.
Because you said there, like, they finished on +1. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Obviously, they finished on +1, conceded 6 goals, but 3 was in that first game.
Yeah.
Right. So you even take that out, then they conceded 2 in their next 4. And I think they were fairly unlucky. They had to go away to Junior and try and beat them in the last game because of the goal difference. And they had a man sent off, which was a little bit controversial and all that. And if that was at home, they would have probably smashed them 2-3-0. Right. So it's just a case of like, no one's really potentially breaking it down and looking at it from a different point of view, which is where people sometimes sneak under the radar. We spoke about Sao Paulo, but all eyes were on Botafogo to begin with. A couple of embarrassing results at the start, and everyone's dismissed them and start looking at Flamengo again. Now that could only benefit them, really. Yes, we're going to get onto it. They've got Palmeiras in the round of 16, which is going to be one hell of a tie. But you've got to beat the best in this competition at some point, and the round of 16 can be brutal, and it can be relentless from the very beginning for certain teams, depending on that draw. So they have almost been punished for finishing in second place, but it's brought about one hell of a tie, hasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's the tie of the round, isn't it? It's really exciting, and I think Brazil are incredibly well represented, and potentially even better represented if Grêmio get through their next 2 games. They could have 7 teams in the round of 16. So to have one all-Brazilian tie, I think is good, because it means one gets taken out and it makes it a bit more exciting moving forward. But it also means that the atmosphere is always crazy and the narrative surrounding those sort of matches is great. So to have something like that as early as the round of 16 is always fun, because I think sometimes the round of 16 is the round of upsets, but it's also sometimes the round of sort of dead rubber games, because it's kind of like, well, the best team are playing the worst team, and we know how that ends. But yeah, I also wanted to give some credit to Junior's keeper. I was looking at some of the numbers and like, how have they managed to stay top of this group? And I think single-handedly he's responsible for keeping out 2.9 goals or something in the group stage, which is why they are where they are. He ranks in the 99th percentile in the Copa Lib. Obviously, small sample size, but 99th percentile for save percentage with 88%, which is insane, and also 93rd in terms of post-shot expected goals minus goals against, so overperformance, I guess, with +4.2 per 90. So every other game, he's basically keeping out a goal more than he's expected to. So fair play to him. He's been in inspired form. And I guess the interesting thing is, at the other end of the pitch, Junior actually underperformed their expected goals by roughly the same amount. So imagine if they had someone in the same form as their keeper up front. Who knows? They probably would have come away with 16 points.
Oh, poor Carlos Bacca. Thought he'd done enough. But look, if I'm going to go back to that first game as well, I think they had 3 shots on target, 3 goals within the first half when that happened, which helps. And I think like you've painted it in a much more positive way, focusing on Junior's goalkeeper there, where I've gone, well, hang on a minute, like that can't go on forever. So like he's obviously played incredibly well, and something I'd missed. So I'm glad that you brought that to the table, but I don't think that can last going further into the competition. We'll see, won't we? Let's go into Group E, and anyone who's listened to me before, I talk about Bolivar almost as if they're my first child, and they've finally done it, haven't they? They topped a group, and they are look, they got through last time, but it's a case of look, they always win their away game, always win their home games, and it's just a case of one away game can like be the difference for a Bolivian team, and they smashed Palestino 4-0. So yes, I know it's Palestino, but Palestino beat Flamengo, who we'll focus on for the sake of this. Bolivar, I'll leave that for when they go through in the round of 16 part. But Flamengo, I can't work them out. They always have a really poor start to the campaign and end up winning something. Last season was just a disaster, but they still managed to get back in the Libertadores somehow. And then now they finished 3 points behind Bolivar. I don't get it. But then at the weekend they beat Vasco 6-1, and then it's all starting to look a little bit rosier again. And things behind the scenes with Goodall, the whole time I was in Brazil, he was on the TV everywhere you looked about like his behaviour, and there's always something going on at Flamengo. And now Chichi, he was the saviour last season and getting him into the Libertadores, and now everyone's calling him boring, but then they smashed Bolivar and Millonarios to qualify in second comfortably in the end. And it's what they do, right? They always start slow. People are on them, maybe because expectations are so high when it comes to Flamengo, but they've qualified. This won't go if they win the title. Like all this we're talking about now, about scraping through and sort of these embarrassing things behind the scenes won't matter. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on Flamengo, because I can't work them out, because one week they'll smash them on and the next they'll embarrass themselves, and there's just a real inconsistency with them.
Yeah, I've got them down as one of my 3 disappointments. I think before the Copa Lib started, I think we spoke about how they were sort of going to be out for vengeance almost. I think we all agreed they'd signed pretty well. They got given a pretty comfortable group from the outside looking in. It seemed like one that they should top. They haven't. I think, as you say, massive inconsistency has been something that's a bit of a stain on the club for a while now, quite frankly. But as you've also mentioned, they do always somehow just manage to kick into gear. And I think their form over the last 4 group stage games has been really impressive. So we'll see. But yeah, I don't know. I think every season they'll be expecting to win the Copa Lib. It has to be their expectation. If they're in the tournament, they have to assume they're going to win it. They're one of the biggest. I'll go with one of, because I don't want to take any sides. No. Certainly one of the biggest clubs in South American football, 100%. And they've got aspirations that match that. But for a while now, it's just seemed like it's just too much chaos in the background. I think the one positive, well, there's probably more than one. I'm probably being harsh, but I think Pedro's form has been great. Again, I think he's one of those players who, along with a couple of other Brazilian players in the Serie A, who I'm just like always surprised that the move hasn't happened yet. And it's, at least with John Kennedy, we kind of know why, right? It's all the off the pitch stuff. With Pedro, he's been so good consistently for so long now in terms of goal scoring, and also underrated creative wise as well. And it's just never seemed to really happen. He's still only 26, so who knows? Maybe it will happen again. Maybe a club will take a punt on it. But yeah, I think his form's been great. And I think if they are going to go as far as they hope to, it's going to have to all be built around him, frankly, because I don't really see where it's coming from otherwise.
Let's move on to Group F. And again, I think the table has slightly lied a little bit in terms of Palmeiras bossing it. San Lorenzo have qualified ahead of Independiente de Valle, who have once again massively disappointed the Copper Club podcast and Ecuador, because we talked them up all the time last season. They got knocked out in the round of 16. This time, who was that against last time? Oh, Deportivo Pereira, wasn't it? Yeah. That was because Michael Hoyas did that really stupid run up, didn't he, for the penalty? Yeah, to embarrass themselves there. And they've fallen short again in a group where they should have comfortably finished in that top 2. I thought they could even top it with Palmeiras in there, but they haven't. They're really disappointed. We do get to see Kendry Paez in the Sudamericana now, so that almost feels like a cheat code, doesn't it? Because since he signed for Chelsea, it's funny because when Endrick signed for Real Madrid, there was a lot of pressure and he didn't really thrive under it at first. Now Kendry Paez has gone the complete opposite way. Check out his goal against Palmeiras. Just please tune in and watch him, especially at Copa America. He's probably one of the biggest and best talents I've seen for years coming out of South America. He's a pleasure to watch. It's such a shame that, well, he's a 17-year-old carrying club and country at the moment. It's a shame that he couldn't carry them through. But let's focus on Palmeiras, because look, all eyes are going to be on Luis Guilherme from a West Ham point of view now. Every Chelsea fan in the world is watching Esteval. But I'm going to be negative again here, because look, Esteval, Abel Ferreira here has, in terms of what I'm trying to get at here is, look, he needed Endrick last season to save him and win him that title. Without Endrick, he was very stubborn. He stuck to this 4-2-3-1 formation, which, yes, brought him loads of success, but he needed to adapt. And it was costing him big time. They failed in the Libertadores to Boca, which was a huge disappointment. But domestically, they had to bring Endrick in, let him do his thing. And he salvaged the season mainly because Botafogo bottled their lead. Now, he has Esteval, Luis Guilherme, and Endrick. And that should excite everybody. When it happens, it all goes over Twitter. These three are starting, and it's been nothing but disappointment, to be honest with you. Very rigid style of play. People are like questioning what we're saying about Esteval in terms of, is he really that good? I've watched Palmeiras and didn't really do too much. And you may notice the same with Luis Guilherme now from West Ham fans, if I'm going to be honest with you. Abel Ferreira, a great coach, but with the whole links to Qatar in the off season, which looked like it was going to go through, and then he stayed, and now he's not exploring new options with his team, and it's not a Palmeiras side we've come accustomed to over the years. I'm not particularly impressed with them here, and it's just a huge disappointment because there's always attacking the talent, and now there's a lot of European eyes on them, and he's not showing true South American football, which is what we love, and this is why we do the podcast. And he's just disappointing people, really. So is he going to be the one to potentially move across? Because Palmeiras, if they get knocked out to Botafogo here, there's going to be a lot of pitchforks heading his way.
Yeah. I think this team, more than any, has been not the biggest. It sounds ridiculous to say the biggest disappointment, because they've scored 14 goals in the group stage. They've been good, but I think when I think of Palmeiras, I think the squad that they have is probably the squad that is most equipped to play that sort of samba style, the really exciting Brazilian style that we all arrived at this podcast for. That's why we do it. That's how we got into South American football, right? That's not to say that I haven't grown to love the diverse nature of South American football and the horrible low blocks that teams like the strongest lock in and create upsets. Hey. I've learned to love all of it.
No Bolivian hate on this podcast, please.
However, it does feel like they're a bit shackled. And I guess in tournament football, there is something to be said to that, but also it's not the knockout stages yet. It's the group stage. You can give a bit of freedom. You can give these players a bit of license. I just feel like they're not maybe being set up to have the success that they necessarily deserve, or to entertain in the way that they all can, which is a real shame. What I will say, however, I think moving forward is that the squad that they do have, it's interesting when you look at the numbers. They've got 14 goals in the group stage, so automatically you're like, whoa, who's been scoring all the goals? And their top scorer in the Copa has got 2 goals. It's 14 goals spread across 11 or so players, which is crazy. But that's real strength in depth that is going to do you well in the tournament, is that you can rely on all of the players, and not even just the young players. I think Rafa Vega's form has been insane, and he's obviously a key piece of this side. Like he's the linchpin. We talk about Kendry, Esteval, Luis Guilherme, but also you've got Lopez, who has been a little bit hot and cold, but is a reliable goal scorer, I think. And if built around, I think he can kick on and start bagging again as we get into the knockout stages. So I think there's probably a lot more to come from them. I'll give a quick shout out to Gabriel Menino, who I think when he has played has looked good again. I feel like he's one of the biggest enigmas for me in Brazilian football. He's someone who I've been waiting to just go and become like the best central midfielder in South America, because he's got all of the skills to do it. He's a great ball recoverer. He's very comfortable under pressure. He can carry. He's got excellent vision and distribution. It's the complete package, but it just hasn't seemed to click. But again, every time I've seen him perform in the Copa Lib this season, he's been great. He's looked really impactful. I just don't understand why he's not been able to establish himself as like one of the most central midfielders.
He blows hot and cold, doesn't he? And I think the expectations for him went through the roof because of Danilo's success and his pathway into the Premier League. I think that's why he's probably, I don't know if he's not potentially lived up to that high expectation or whether that pressure's got to him that he's had to step up, and straight away, if Danilo was never there or he was playing alongside him, perhaps that may have progressed him further. But interesting point there you made about like the very goal scorers, because Endrick obviously will depart now for Real Madrid. He won't be part of the team going forward. Maybe that unlocks them. We're looking at it from a negative point of view. I'm going to try and put a positive spin on this podcast about 50 minutes in, but that could be sort of maybe Lopez's opportunity there to explode in the round of 16 like John Kennedy did for Fluminense last season. He didn't do anything in the groups or barely played, and then came alive when it really mattered, and obviously scored the winner to lift the Libertadores at the Americanas. So we'll see. Look, I think there's two more teams we're going to talk about before we try and wrap this up. And I'm going to try and give a nice chunky segment here to Atletico Mineiro, who I spoke about on the podcast previously, how they could potentially be champions. They topped the group with 15 points. Yes, you could look at their group and say it wasn't like the strongest, but we spoke about it with Fluminense and Palmeiras, and they've almost disappointed. But under Gabriel Milito, they've just been great to watch, haven't they? And we said about, we had to write down a few here, in terms of like Scarpa, who's been unbelievable for Mineiro in terms of not only goals, assists, his general play. He's been the missing piece for Paulinho and Hulk. And the fact that he stepped in seamlessly, as we thought he would do back in Brazil, but he's been such an integral part of the team. But there's so many little fiddly players as well. But the one I want to talk about mainly is Alisson Santana, who's, massively impressed. And like, look, I wrote about him. We spoke about him previously on the podcast, one to watch in Brazil this season. Even Tim Vickery was tweeting about him the other day, and Tim Vickery doesn't put too many tweets out about individual players, but scored a really nice goal against Caracas in the last game, sort of an overhead half bicycle kick. And he looks like the next sort of player on the conveyor belt to Europe, to be honest with you. I think his ceiling's really high. I'd love someone like Forest to look at him, to be honest with you. I think Forest are crying out for wingers at the moment. So someone like that who wouldn't cost more than, 10, 20 million? I know that's quite a big gap, but something like that to get an established winger at the age of 18, 19. He's really impressed, and he's learning under Gustavo Scarpa and Paulinho and Hulk in that rotating front three. But defensively sound as well. Guilherme Arana, the left back, 25, 26. Okay, maybe his European days will be over, but another hugely important player, and playing down that left side with Scarpa and Alisson Santana in that rotation. Under Milito, complete package. I've been banging on about them for ages. Yes, I know I'm sat in a Botafogo shirt right now, and I love them as well. But the two black and white striped teams have caught my eye this year, clearly. And I just think that they have a real chance of going all the way. And they haven't drawn Palmeiras in the round of 16, so it's impossible for them to be knocked out this time by them, which I think they'll be buzzing about. Cal, thoughts on Mineiro?
Yeah, really impressive. Really impressive. I wasn't sure what to expect going into this season. I think only because there's been so much change in the Brazilian league in general. I think with managers coming and going, lots of transfers, Flamengo signing well, whether Flum would maintain their form, what Botafogo were going to do. So I think I probably just overlooked Mineiro because of all the change going on elsewhere.
Clearly wasn't listening to me, were you?
Yeah,
clearly
exactly.
Zoned out of me banging on about them.
But yeah, they've gone about their business incredibly well, and I think they probably could have even done even better in the group. I think they were unfortunate with a few of the goals they conceded, and yeah, Alisson is just, yeah, we'll be hearing a lot about him over the next year, I'm sure, in terms of what a top European side wants in a winger, in terms of ball carrying, in terms of out of possession as well. The way that he presses is just so aggressive, but also so intelligent. I think he's not going to be one of those wingers who like you have to carry because he's a liability out of possession, but so good in possession that you just find a way around it. He's got both. And I think he's only going to develop, as you say, playing around those, that front three, Hulk in particular, but also the form that Paulinho's in. I mean, who else would you want to be playing alongside at the minute? And yeah, I think that front three, there were so many question marks about whether it would click, whether Paulinho would maintain his form from last season, how Gustavo Scarpa would embed himself back in Brazilian football, whether Hulk's too old. No is always the answer. Hulk is never too old. But I think it's just clicked so much better than I would have even have imagined. And then to be able to bed Alisson Santana in there as well around that is just the dream scenario, I think, if you're a Mineiro fan. But yeah, I wanted to give some love to Scarpa quickly as well. I know that you're a huge fan, but I think I hoped that he would come back and just hit the ground running. I didn't expect that he would do it quite so quickly and quite so effectively. But the relationship that he's built has been great. I think the only concern that I have with Mineiro, and it's kind of that balancing act, right, is that they've massively outperformed their expected goals in the group stage. I think they've scored 14 and their expected goals is nowhere near that. I think it's 8.6. So 6 more goals than expected, roughly. If that dips back towards the mean, what happens then? The flip side is teams that outperform their expected goals usually is because they've got players that are capable of outperforming their expected goals. And when you look at that attack, I think it's probably closer to that end rather than it just being a bit of an anomaly. I think they've got some seriously impressive attackers, and you can have confidence that they probably will maintain it at least for a little while longer.
We'll wrap up the podcast with a negative because I want to speak. We'll finish talking about River Plate, who topped Group H, 16 points, almost flawless, 12 goals scored, only 3 conceded. Doesn't really paint the picture, does it? Because Di Michaelis, he can't win over the River fan base. He does his own thing. He's got so many youngsters at his disposal. I don't think he knows exactly how to get the best out of them. Maybe it's a similar situation to Abel Ferreira with the pressure of Palmeiras as well in terms of trying overcomplicating it a little bit, but their group was incredibly weak. Like even the last game, Deportivo Táchira only beat him 2-0. I mean, I'd expect River Plate to go and smash on 4-5, 6-0 and dance into the round of 16, but it hasn't really been the case, to be honest with you. So it's been a group where, yes, they pretty much got almost maximum points, but there's something not convincing me there with River, and I think because there's that toxic relationship at the moment between Di Michaelis and the fan base, it's almost spilling out onto the pitch a little bit. Like, look, Miguel Boya has been unbelievable since Lucas Beltran's left, and that can only continue for so long. Like, you can't keep relying on him to score 1 or 2 goals every game. It's just not plausible in football. What do you make of River? We're going to finish with a negative before we do like a prediction of who we think's potentially going to go on and win the Libertadores from here. But yeah, and you can say, look, the finals at El Monumento, and I think people are getting a little bit carried away with that because I still think there's Brazilian dominance there. But in a group of Nacional, Libertad, Deportivo Táchira, they still didn't really particularly impress. And especially if you look at that Nacional game away from home, 2-0 up, they should be seeing that out, especially with the contrast and levels and the quality there. They gave away 2 cheap goals and drew that game. And to me, that was a huge red flag. Don't worry about the other fixtures. Routine wins, fine. That should have been expected. But that game, there was something there which just stood out to me in terms of their vulnerability, to be honest with you. And I'm not sure if Di Michaelis is the man really there, just purely because of that toxic, that it's just that toxic in the air between him and the fan base. And I just don't think that ever works out particularly well.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think Di Michaelis annoys me because I think on the surface, I should like it. I should like the football. There's what I think he's trying to do, this sort of hybrid relational stuff, but not quite full-on relationism, but trying to give players some freedom, but then reverting from it sometimes and playing defensive football. And it's like there doesn't seem to be an obvious identity, which I think is probably what the River fans are most annoyed about, is that they flip between coming and going and being attacking and being defensive. And I think when you're a team as dominant as River, in the same way that, I don't know, obviously it's a silly comparison, but in the same way that a Madrid or a City, because they're one of the most dominant teams in the field in which they play, they don't tend to have to change how they play that often. They have their way, and because they're the best, it's up to the opposition to come and step to them and try and match it. And if that happens, then we'll change. It doesn't seem like River have that sort of mentality that, like, we are the biggest and best, so we're going to play this way. And it doesn't seem like that's been instilled throughout the club. I think that's probably the biggest disappointment. I think as far as the group stage goes, I think, as you said, it looks flawless on the surface level, but with the quality of the opposition, to not have a single game where you score more than 2 goals against those opposition, considering the quality of player that you have at your disposal and considering the form that Miguel Borja's in. It has to be considered a disappointment. It probably sounds like we're being incredibly harsh because, like you say, they've arguably had the best group stage of any team. They've gone unbeaten. They were only 1 draw away from winning all 6. So, yeah, fine, that's great. But I just think as soon as they come up against a much trickier opposition, I don't even know who you would say the best team that they faced is in that group. I think you could make a case for either Nacional or Libertad. So there's no out and out second place side, which I think always means if there isn't an obvious second place contender, then you're always wanting to be smashing that group, and they just didn't do it. But yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think defensively they have been solid, and I think in cup football, as we know, particularly in the Libertadores, if you can have a solid defense and then rely on a few good attackers to bring the goals when you need them, then you can go far. As I said already in this pod, Boca Juniors did it. They got to the final because they had a decent defense. They did it ugly, but had they won it, would any of the fans give them the crap that they did it ugly? They wouldn't. No, they'd have won the Copa Libertadores and they'd have been absolutely buzzing. So I think I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying we're going to have a repeat and River go to the final instead of Boca and do the same sort of thing. But I'm just saying if they can maintain that defensive form where they score, 3 goals for every goal conceded, then they'll be fine. But it depends whether Demichelis is hounded out first.
Very true, very true. And the fact that he keeps getting linked to Europe is just madness. It's like, is nobody watching the situation which is going on there? Look, we've almost run out. Well, we've definitely run out of time. Definitely gone over. So we'll instead of going through the fixtures round of 16, head across to the Copper Club on Twitter. We've got all the graphics on there, so you can have a look at the setup and the layout there. But I want 2 names from you, Cal, and nothing more on who's going to lift the title now we've gone through the group stage.
Okay. Do I go in my head or do I go in my heart?
Do one each.
Okay. I'm good. I said it. I said I think Sao Paulo will get to the final, so I'll stick to that. I'll probably be made to look like an idiot for saying it, but I have already said it, so I will stick to my guns. I would love, just because it would be absolutely insane, just like Colo Colo to just shithouse their way there under their manager, but I just can't see it happening. In the same way that I think Peñarol are just fun, and I think the relationship that they have with their manager, who's in his 4th spell there, and he just seems to get it, and he just always turns them around. That would be a great story, but obviously it's not going to happen. I will say Sao Paulo, and yeah, I'll back your boys Mineiro. I think based purely on how well functioning that attack is, I think they can probably get there. I don't know if they're on the same side of the tree, so I don't know.
Looking at the tree now, I'm going to do one from each side. You've actually done incredibly well there to name 2 or 3 teams who are on different sides of the draw. I'm not sure how you've done that.
Brilliant. I'm not even looking at it.
Mineiro for me, their route in potentially we've got San Lorenzo and then Fluminense and then potentially River. I think that's a nice, generous draw considering. And then on the other side, if Botafogo beat Palmeiras, I don't think there's anything stopping them, to be honest with you. So, look, I'll bow out with the 2 boys in black and white stripes. I think both the opposite ends of the draw. I think it's going to be another Brazilian team. So, yeah, not quite Colo Colo. Sorry, Cal. We'll leave it there. Look, thank you so much for everyone who's listened to the podcast. You can watch us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Our Copa America season is coming to a close. We've still got Venezuela, which will drop this week, looking at Paraguay, and then Tim Vickery is the special guest who will be coming on to analyse the tournament as a whole, so keep an eye out for that drop in. But look, Cal, thank you very much for your time, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks, guys.